Hi guys, let's take a break from all those Blazor and web development videos to do something else for a change. I've been working on those videos for the past few months and it has been fun. And we did a whole tour of web development, starting from Fable to React to Blazor in the latest groups of videos. We worked on a visual novel language, and now I found that something that I could really get passionate about, which is FPGA programming. This is going to be really interesting, and for the first time I'll finally have a chance to demonstrate how Spiral could be programmed in. I'm going to make a whole series on how to program FPGAs in Spiral, and the subject of that will be implementing a machine learning library from the ground up, not just for deep learning, but also evolutionary algorithms and genetic programming. And we'll implement the poker game as well on that, and we'll make it something amazing, something that instead of just getting something like 10,000 hands per second, tens of thousands of hands, we'll aim to get 1 million hands per second, or even 10 million, and get much better training performance than we could get on just CPUs and GPUs. If I could, I'd want to start doing that right away. But unfortunately, in the last few months, I'm not sure in which version of Visual Studio Code it happened. One of the updates broke the language server, and the communication between the Visual Studio Code plugin and the language server on the .NET side is the communication between those two pieces of software is not happening. So I have to fix that. And that's what we are going to do in this video. And after we do that, we are going to work on the language for a bit more. I've gone through the user guide for the Xilinx FPGAs for their high-level synthesis tools, and all of them have statically allocated arrays everywhere, and they have the array sizes in the type itself. So right now that's a poor fit for the Spiral language. But it wouldn't be hard to, just add the type level literals to the language, and that's what we are going to do after this video. But for this video, if you are somebody working on your own language, but you aren't really familiar with web development or how to make one application talk to another, then this is the video that you want to watch. It's going to be pretty interesting. The language server extension for Spiral is a few years old by now. It worked for many years. And when I did it initially, I wasn't really as familiar with web development as I was now. So I made some incorrect technological choices, mainly choosing 0MQ instead of WebSockets for communicating between the two processes. And why is that a problem? I mean, 0MQ is not a bad library by any means. It has a very good technical documentation. It has ports to various languages. Its source was written in C, or maybe C++, but I think it was C. And yeah, it's a very interesting networking library for communicating over the TCP protocol. But what drives me mad about it and crazy is that, for example, I could start the language server in Visual Studio Code, just leave it on for something like an hour or two, and occasionally the language server itself would shut down. And what that means is that some of the heartbeat messages are getting dropped for no apparent reason. I cannot fix that. I could try, opening an issue on the 0MQ repo, maybe in NetMQ. I mean, on the .NET side, I'm using the NetMQ library, which is like a port of 0MQ, and on the JavaScript side, there is also a JavaScript port of it. And what could be happening is that there is some kind of an error on either the .NET side or the JavaScript side. And suppose I tried opening an issue. I could just say that the messages are getting dropped. And what would happen in that case? My guess is absolutely nothing, because the maintainers of those libraries won't be able to do anything on such a vague report, even if they had the will to go in and fix it. So I'm going to replace the 0NQ ports with signal R, which is based off WebSockets. Initially, I wanted to use 0NQ so I can do inter-process communication, but it turns out the JavaScript library doesn't support it to begin with. It could work if I had something like a netmq .NET process communicating with another .NET process, but what we have now with the Node.js process and the .NET process, we have to go over the network card anyway. So it's the inter-process communication capability is useless anyway, and it's dropping messages. As for why the latest Visual Studio Code update broke the extension, I don't know, and it's not worth my time trying to go in and investigate that. There isn't much I can do about it. Instead, we'll just import the signal R library both on the .NET and the JS side and move from there. In addition to that, I'll explain a bit of how the Visual Studio Code extension API works. Let's get started with that. What we'll do is first do a review of the Visual Studio Code plugin for the Spiral language. The thing that you see on the screen here, well, it's not particularly big. It's only like 300 lines of code, and we'll go over all of that today. First of all, okay, this import doesn't seem to be used, so I'll get rid of it. By now, I worked on this over 3 years ago, so by now I forgot what the FS was supposed to be for. Maybe the file system, I have no idea. Okay, the path, that is for, concatenating paths. All the stuff that you see here, this is actually all the stuff that you see on this line. This is from the Visual Studio Code API. It's actually written with a much lower version of the API in mind. I think a month ago, when I first realized there was something going around with the language extension, I went into it and tried, okay, I think I reverted the change, but the latest is 1.71 or something like that. So I thought maybe there was some kind of bug due to me using an out-of-date API. So what I did was upgraded the Visual Studio Code package. This is the thing you see here, the Types VS Code. I thought maybe if it was the most up-to-date version, something like 1.81, maybe I'd get some kind of a type error in index.ts due to the changes in the engine. But nothing happened, so that cannot possibly be the reason for the error. And I'll admit, maybe I'm blaming the 0NQ library unfairly, but I have run into trouble with it before I even started work on the language extension. So I've always been a bit suspicious of it. And now that this problem has happened, this was the camel that broke. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. Now, okay, let's go over it one by one. This const port number, workspace get configuration, blah blah blah. This just gets the port number for a Spiral. If you have the extension installed, here is what it does. Not like this. I'm pressing Ctrl and comma here. This will open the settings, and then you just type the Spiral into the search, and this is the port. This is what this particular line of code gets from the settings, and you define all those settings in the package JSON file. You have a bunch of things here, like semantic tokens, languages, and so on. This languages thing here, this is what actually causes the Visual Studio Code extension to run. You know, when you first boot the editor, it doesn't actually run the extension, because that would be very expensive. It only runs it if you open one of these files, .spy, .spire, or .spyproj. Now, where is the port? Yeah, here is where are the properties for the configurations for the configuration are defined. 3 years ago, I did look whether if I could have something like backend specific settings, but I couldn't figure out how to get that to happen. Maybe something got added in the last 3.5 years. We'll look into that later, but it isn't important right now. This is basically where you define all those things. We'll go into what the others are later. So you can get what they are just by looking at them. Yeah, you need the activations events. Yeah, everything's as it should be. Okay, we have the port. This request run. This is like this is the function that is responsible for sending the messages over the TCP port to the .NET server. This is the client for it. And this is basically how the ZeroMQ library works. You have this ZMQ request object, you have the server URI, then you connect to the server, then you send a string from this file thing, then you await the answer, then you disconnect, and then you return the reply. There's a bit of a subtlety here if you are using the ZeroMQ library. I have this previous request stored. And the reason for that is because without that, the ZeroMQ library can be a bit annoying, because you'd expect if you make a request that it is the one that would get sent and received first on the server. But without this, without waiting for the answer, it might not happen. The request that is sent first might get delivered last, and vice versa. And this is really annoying. Otherwise, instead of using this synchronous communication of sending a request and then receiving a reply, I do it asynchronously. I just do an asynchronous send using something like ZMQ. What was it called? Was it pair reply? Using the router? Yeah, the router object. But it doesn't work as expected, because ZeroMQ is a bit more asynchronous than you'd want it to be. This is one of the reasons why I am going to switch to the WebSocket library. Okay, what is this? This is basically sending it, and it's also making sure that maybe it's awaiting on the previous. Is it that how it works? I'm not sure. Let me pause for a bit. Okay, I studied these 3 lines, and I'm a bit confused as to why it's not awaiting on the previous request, but that doesn't really matter. Let's just move on. These are Visual Studio Code has many various API extensions. And for example, when you type in the editor, like I'm doing now, it will send each change as as a new string, and it will also give you a range, which is a line and a character. I think this is supposed to be the column, not necessarily it's not necessarily a string character. This is just a position, so it's row and column, and the group of those makes it a range. And the range string, that's a range and with an actual string change. But the reason why it's giving a range And it's not just actually a single range, it can be multiple ones. It's because you can come in and copy paste, and that would be a big change, not just a single character change. In Visual Studio Code, maybe you didn't know, but you can for example set the cursor here, press Alt and then click here and here, and you can type in multiple different places. So you actually need multiple ranges to accommodate all the editor features. Okay, these are like the messages for the code actions. Code actions are what happens when you type Control and dot. I mean, you don't have anything right now. Okay, here it is. It's asking. This is a Typescript code action to do some refactoring. This is range and an action. Yeah, okay. And these are some utilities. Okay, this ping message, these are the heartbeat messages, because the 0enqueue is very low level. If you are using something like a signal library, it would be doing the heart beating messages automatically, and those heart beating messages are to detect when the other side has disconnected. But with 0enqueue you can't do that automatically, so you have to send messages to it periodically. And this is one of the, and as I said in the introduction, 0enqueue drops them occasionally, even though it should have a guarantee that the messages would get delivered. Maybe the buffers are getting congested. Who knows what is going on under the hood? I'm not going to spend my time looking at it. And all of these are just these are just the utility functions for the individual requests being sent from the client, which is the Visual Studio Code extension for Spiral, to the server, to the language server. The error set. Oh, this is a where is the actual the errors? Oh yeah, I mean, it's okay. What this is just when you have a bunch of errors in the code. For example, you have some kind of type error. I'm not sure whether this is a type error or a passing error, but at any rate, the Visual Studio Code exposes a diagnostic collection, which is kind of which is like an array, and then you just set it to all the error. You have these diagnostic objects which take in a range. I have my own range, VSC range. I'm converting it to just the the inbuilt Visual Studio Code extension range. And in this, and setting the diagnostic severity to error. If I wanted to do something like a warning, I could do that as well as a hint or an information. You just pass the ranges into this array. Client res. Okay, these are the messages getting sent from the server to the client. As you can see, these are all error messages, and it's actually pretty rudimentary. And the way this is done, and just let me just mention this receive here. It's not actually getting errors back from the server. It's just here to act as a confirmation that the message has been delivered. All the messages are being sent back through a different port, even though I'd want it to be the same port. But because I'm using the 13805 to send messages to the server from the client, I need a different port so I can send the messages back synchronously. If I were using something like signal R, this wouldn't be necessary, but right here it is. Yeah, these are just descriptions for the code actions, and this should never happen. It's just here in case I forgot to fill in too much. If for example I could add some kind of union type here, and then forgot to match on it here, and then this would catch it. Oh, type spiral action. It doesn't seem like this is being used anywhere, so who cares? Oh, this console log is commented out. Yeah, okay, you can have, you know, multiple diagnostic collections for the language, and these are it. Spiral project open, spiral project change. Yeah, here we are, you know, sending those requests. And with oh yeah, now I remember what this doc URI is for. The doc URI, that's kind of like, I think that should be, let me think, is this, I think this should be the, let me pause for a bit. Okay, I thought about it for a bit. I'm not sure completely, but I think this could either be the, you know, the inbuilt URI for the inside the editor, or it could be the file URI for a direct link to the file on the hard drive. I'm not sure which it is right now, because this was 3.5 years ago. We'll do some logging later in order to figure this out, but it doesn't matter right now. These are just some utility functions. In Spiral, I don't actually, you know, apply the changes inside the tokenizer indirectly. Inside the tokenizer, I also kind of duplicate everything that is going on in the editor, but I do it on a line-by-line basis, because that way it is easier. So, you know, for example, if I write some text in a line, it doesn't, I don't send the exact changes to the editor, to the language server, sorry. I don't send the exact change to the language server, but the whole line. And this way it's more redundant. As I said, you know, the 0MQ can drop messages and so on, so doing it like this helps a lot. I'm using this as an utility, just to count the lines in a string, something like that. And this spy change thing, let me pause a bit so I can think about it. I had some time to think about it. Okay, basically, this is, you know, because the messages are getting dropped, I had to, you know, add various kinds of redundancy in the Visual Studio Code extension. And this is, this function, the reason it's like this is because of that. What I'm doing here is, you know, we are not getting just a, you know, a single change event from the document. Instead, we are inside every event there is a range. And now, yeah, this is a text document change event. It's actually a range, and it's also a string to what it has changed. And this doc text documents, these are in Visual Studio Code, these are actually the documents, and these documents are these tabs that I have open. I'm not sure whether this should be qualified as a document, but package.json and index.ts definitely are. So here I'm checking whether there are any changes. Then I'm sorting the changes. I think they, in fact, they can come in unsorted order, so doing this sort is good. Then I just get the, you know, the start of the first line. Then I go over them. And what I'm trying to do here inside this function is get the line of the starting change and get the, you know, the last line or the last range. And this is not as easy as it seems, because, you know, what these ranges are the removals. If I, for example, you know, do something like this, this would be like maybe 4 lines or maybe 3. I'm not sure right now, but you can also, you know, do something like for example, you have 2 lines, and right now I'm removing 5 lines, but I'm also adding 2. But if you just look at the range, you'd see that the length of the range is 5 lines. So in addition to that, I have to count how many lines I've removed in each change, and I have to count how many lines are added. And to do that, I actually have to count the number of line breaks inside the text string. And in addition to that, this line adjust, this is what counts, the how many lines have been added minus how many of them have been removed, and then that gets added to the near to. And this is just counting the actual range. So after this reduction is done, I have the the first line in this from, and I have the last line in this near to. It's actually it will always be greater than the last line. It's the last line plus 1. Sorry about that. And I need this line adjust, because if I just looked at the ranges, it wouldn't give me the correct line. And after that, I just put on the lines in between the from and near to into this array, and that is what actually gets passed into the language server. Admittedly, it would be more efficient if I got the actual ranges instead of something big. Right now, if I do something like and this would be a huge range, starting from line 93 to line 115. And yes, it would be better if I did just individual changes. But that would take more effort than doing just this on the language server side, so I didn't want to bother. Let's move on. Maybe if I started with a single R, maybe if you are doing your own language, you should start with single R, and maybe you won't have trouble with messages being dropped. And then, if you have that kind of reliability, you could go through for a more precise way of doing the language server extension. But this way isn't bad either. I do hate that I have this kind of functionality instead of just dropping the changes in directly, but I have no choice to do that. Yes, you could definitely do this part better than I did. But in early 2020, I didn't know any web development at all. I didn't know how one process could, transfer messages to another. So I did search, and I stumbled upon the 0MQ library. I mean, what do I know? I did do some studying on ASP.NET Core, but if you start an initial project, it will drop you into MVC, and who's going to bother studying that? I mean, if I had somebody like me telling you now to just take the Signal library and study WebSockets, that would have been a huge help, but I didn't. But this isn't a problem. We have this is actually when you are deleting some file inside the editor, like this. For example, I could go in here, press delete, and I could delete it. Then this kind of event would actually get triggered. I think I have the API provider for this somewhere. Let's check it. Let's do a little search for it. How do I do all the references for it? Yeah, here's the file delete event, and where is the on delete getting used? Let's do a peek. Where is the command? Oh, here's the command. Yeah, workspace on did delete files. Yeah, the workspace has various event handlers. you know, like the HTML DOM and all the UI libraries have. Visual Studio Code works on the same principle. Let's go back. The Spiral tokens. Yeah, this document range the semantic tokens provider. What the semantic tokens are, you know, for every word you have a semantic token. Different languages have keywords in them. For example, Typescript has const, read-only, class, implements, async, return. Those are all language keywords. They aren't variables or anything like that. And for every such keyword, you can provide a semantic token. And for example, some class would have one token, async would have another, const would have another. And you can use that for styling in the editor. And yeah, Spiral has various semantic tokens as well. If you look at the package JSON, you'll be able to see them. For example, semantic tokens type. I have the ID, and each of them has, you know, a unary, a super type, and these super types are already built in. I think it may be possible to define your own, but I think I tried it, but I wasn't successful at it for some reason. You know, my memory is a bit fuzzy at this point, but they're pretty easy to use. And I suggest using them. You'd implement this kind of functionality either in the parser or the tokenizer, and I'm using both for Spiral. I mean, in the tokenizer I just do the first pass for the inbuilt types, but then inside the parser I also do some extra editing for that. So in fact, these tokens get first applied from the tokenizer, and then another message gets sent after the parsing is done to apply all the changes from the parsing. This thing, yeah. I guess for this particular request, I said that they are all supposed to be units, but it seems I was wrong. I guess some requests do have in fact a return. Anyway, but this isn't a problem with WebSocket connections. You have asynchronous sends, and you also have the synchronous invokes in Signal R. You can also use that for this kind of functionality. We'll be using that eventually. The horror provider. The horror provider is one of the most important providers in my view, next to the error messages. The horror provider is what gives you the type once you hover over a variable, as well as other kinds of information. Spiral has this. On the language side, you just collect during the type checking during the type info space, you just collect all the ranges as well as the types as a tuple, and then you send them over to the editor. And in fact, actually, I'm not sending them all to the editor. Instead, the editor sends a request to the language server. It's pretty convenient. This is supposed to be a markdown string, but in Spiral's case I'm not using the markup functionality. Instead of I'm using the plain text as the content type. Yeah. This markdown string yeah, it could be anything, I guess. Maybe you could mix, plain text with HTML and various other things. I think I should move to HTML. But, back then I didn't know HTML or CSS, so that's why I didn't do it. This is what happens. This is what gets triggered on document open. Alright, this is the extension name. Oh yeah, this is just getting the extension name. And this is getting the base name. Oh, just a second. This URI path. Let me just pause for a bit. I need to think about what I said earlier about URIs. Okay, right now I'm still confused whether this URI is some, in-memory URI inside the Visual Studio Code, or whether it's a direct file on the hard drive. It's pretty telling that I can't remember this, because I remember there being some confusion 3.5 years ago as well. Let's move on from that. When this event happens, it just sends the document as a message to the server. These are the on-change events. Content changes. Yeah, this is what in the spy change, what was in here. It just scans the ranges and sends the newly changed lines to the language server. We have the on delete, on rename, Spiral project links. What these are the links in the spy project file. You can actually, inside the Visual Studio Code documents, you can actually have links. And I do in fact, inside the Spiral project, I do in fact have them. Let me just run the Spiral extension for a little bit. I mean, it's broken right now, so you won't be able to understand what I'm referring to, but I'll illustrate it to you in words. I just ran the extension using Control F5. Right now it won't work, but if it did work, what you'd see over main is an underscore. And if you, for example, held the control and left clicked on it, it would link you directly to the file, which is this one. Spiral projects are convenient like that. I have my own DSL for the language project files. It also has a bunch of code actions which are activated using control dot, which would allow you to create new modules or rename or delete them directly inside this file. So you don't have to, rename them here and then rename them manually inside the file editor, like here. Let me close it. If you look at the Spiral server here, why are these messages getting printed? Maybe I left some, print statements inside of the supervisor. I think while I was debugging just recently. Printfn. Okay, we'll figure that out later. Or maybe there's some kind of log here that I forgot to remove. Log. Okay, I have no idea. We'll figure that out later. Why is it printing this? This URI. Oh yeah. This is how the URI actually works. So it's not some inbuilt URI, but it's in fact the URI as it is. Yeah, the confusing part is not because the URI is not just a C, but it also has this file prefix with the triple slashes to indicate that it is a file on the hard drive. That's what was confusing me. Let's close this for now. Once it's fixed, I'll demonstrate what the links are doing. Now, where were we? Code actions. Rename file. Specs edit, replace. apply edit. I'm a bit, confused because let me see what this is. It's just sending a message. I remember that I think the Spiral language server has some capability to, delete and create files, and I think the language server is the one responsible for it. But I see that there's also some kind of renaming going on here. I think maybe I'm doing the editing inside the workspace. I can't exactly remember why I decided to do the file creation inside the language server and the renaming here, but that's how it is. The same goes for the code, the deletion. Could I do something like edit create, for example? Edit create. There's this edit create file. Okay, let me try doing a workspace edit. Const. It also has to be a new. You could also, yeah, it has a create file. And for consistency's sake, I should be using that, but I probably had a reason why I didn't. And no doubt it's all 0MQ's fault. Now, this is one other thing that's 0MQ's fault. It's the fact that I'm, binding, yeah, I need to start the server from the, okay, this part isn't the fault of the messaging library, but inside the language extension, I actually need to start the language server. And the language server is this spiral.dll here. I create a path for it, and then I start it from the command line using the .NET tool. Later, this is going to be changed. There is a Visual Studio Code extension, so it can download the runtime automatically. It probably has something so I can use the runtime without going through the command line. But back then I didn't know any better, so this is the approach that I used. It takes into compiler path the port, and the port is just yeah, the port is the regular thing that I am passing in through the command line. And this is how the program gets started. Let me show you what is in the compiler folder. You have all these DLLs that the language is using, like fparsec, f#JSON, and so on. You also have this spiral exe. And in fact, if you run this, you could run it the language server this way on Windows. But that will not make it cross-platform, because Linux cannot run these exe files. Neither could Mac OS, whatever it's using. It's probably some kind of Linux or Unix distribution. So I actually need to run the DLL file, which is this one. I mean, that kind of surprised me. But if you run it like this from the .NET extension using the .NET tool, this will make the extension cross-platform, and you will be able to run it anywhere, on any kind of platform. And now this thing here is running running a server on the VS Code side, and the reason for that is, as I said, I don't have a bidirectional communication using the request sockets, so I also have to make a subscriber. Yeah, it seems that this thing is using the publisher subscriber pattern of 0MQ. And yeah, it's receiving the errors from the server as they get inferred, and they are getting sent here, and they are getting set. And this is how I implemented the error setting. If I had to do all this again, I'd use the signal R library to just receive regular messages for this. And this is in fact what we will be changing today. And this trace length and number, this is one of the options. You know, in addition to regular top-down messages, top-down error messages, like you get when you try something like this. Instead of this kind of errors, Spiral also has a partial evaluation capabilities, where it goes through the entire language in a bottom-up fashion. And if you have a type error during partial evaluation or code generation, you get back a trace, and it gets displayed inside the editor as an error message, as a trace. A little window would pop up in the bottom right corner of the editor, and this is the length of that trace. So because it would be preferable to restrict such an error to something like 5 or 10 or 20 lines, otherwise it would become unreadable. Yeah, Visual Studio Code has this window object, and you can use it to show various kinds of error messages or input boxes or dialogues or quick picks. And this is very convenient. Like the browser has the DOM, and the Visual Studio Code has this window object instead. Yeah, you cannot really. Actually, you probably can use this log here, but I don't know where the error messages would pop up. Maybe we'll look into that later. Right now, I don't know. I don't even care. Okay, so we're almost done with the review, possibly. There are some kind of error messages. And the heartbeat messages. You should be also receiving some kind of sending and receiving some kind of heartbeat message here. I don't know where it's doing that. Oh, it's doing that here. I'm doing this, While it's processing, I send regular heartbeat messages every 1000 milliseconds, and if it skips to an arrow, then the server gets turned off on both ends. I think the message dropping issue could be alleviated to a large degree if instead of passing just one message a second, I'd pass in 10 messages a second. I think in that case maybe the error would go away. But I don't want to bother with this low level stuff anymore. And then when the language server starts, I iterate over all the text documents that are open, all the tabs here, and then send a request to open it to the server. And this is what is this previous requesting? Yeah, once the server stops, I also set the previous request to this empty promise. The terminal is disposed, this processing is set to false, and this timeout is set to next. Yeah, okay. I'm a bit I've forgotten what this timeout is about. Let me just pause for a bit. Okay, this server stop thing is, for example, if you close the plugin forcefully, or if you do something like restarted with a code action, I think this is what would get triggered. You can just, you know, set a promise and trigger it inside the disposable. And then this file pattern, this project file pattern, the token legend. What is that for? I mean, right now I'm just a bit confused because, you know, we're also registering the semantic token provider in package JSON. We have all this. I mean, maybe this is something on which just the extension activates. And if you want also the semantic token provider to work on top of that, you need to provide these file patterns, as well as the pattern from the project file provider. Yeah, the document link provider, as you can see here, it's only on the SpyProj files, not just the code actions. But the file pattern is the semantic token provider is activates on the regular patterns. Oh yeah, I also have a bunch of commands for Spiral. One of the commands is a build file. That's what happens when you, for example, let me run the plugin again. You could go over here and press F1 and it needs a bit to start, and you press F1 and then Spiral and you do a build file, and it would build the, you know, the main file here. It looks for the function that's called main inside the file, and then it compiles it. Right now I don't have, you know, a lot of language functionality for building files. More should be added in the future. But that's how you do build the file currently, and it's a pretty effective way of doing it. I don't have any complaints with it so far. What happens when I do that? Then it goes over visible text editors. I mean, it may be possible to, you know, split the screen somehow, do something like in the middle, like something like this, and then do a build, and it would that way you could have, you know, multiple active tabs that each of them need to be configured. Right now, what it is doing here is just getting the backend, and then sending a build file request to the language server, and that's where it gets built. The code generator, the code generation, the partial. When you do this, first the partial evaluation happens, then that information gets passed to the code generator, and if their code generation finishes successfully, the file gets built. And I think that happens. I know there's also the start server and the start server hidden. That's something you can use if the server shuts down. For example, you can use it to restart it. I think it's a bit buggy. No, it's not buggy. Sorry about that. It works properly. The start server hidden is so the Spiral server doesn't start inside the terminal. Instead, not like that. Instead, the terminal would be hidden. Yeah, I have no idea why this is getting printed. Let me pause a bit and I'll find where that print statement is being executed. I paused just for like a minute. Well, there aren't actually any print statements in the code right now, or at least on the language server. But there was one before, and I published the project into the folder with that statement turned on. And then later I removed it, but I didn't, republish the project. In case you're wondering, the way I'm publishing the project currently is, where is that? Something like publish selection. You can do a publish, and I already have it configured so that it's getting built and then copied into this target location, which is the VS Code plugin. And just click on publish, and the extension would get built and then compiled into that folder. I mean, after this finishes, the error should go away, but we first need to close the extension. Otherwise, it might get, the files might get locked, and it would fail to finish. And that's basically should be all of it. This run closure thing, I have this command, but I don't think I'm using it anywhere. The commands also need to be in the packages JSON. Where are these commands? Yeah, as you can see, we have this start server hidden, and build file, but we don't have the run closure command anywhere, so it's pretty useless. I'll just comment it out. Who cares? Let me just make sure. Actually, I was wrong. This command is in fact getting run, and it's in Spiral project code actions. I think I'm probably using this to get some asynchronous functionality inside the code editor. I don't recall whether there is any particular reason why I'm running a command directly like this instead of just doing an async. Yeah, I'm having this. I have these actions in a map. Was there any reason that I'm doing it this way? I don't know. I mean, it was 3.5 years ago, and 3.5 years ago is a long time. 3.5 years ago is enough to go through high school. So I'll forget a thing or two. Let me just comment this back in, otherwise it will break the extension. And this is like a mini tutorial that I did for for my own and your convenience. So now you basically have some kind of idea about how the Visual Studio Code works. In addition to this, I'd like to recommend the Visual Studio Code API examples. I mean, if you're starting with a language, there's a whole GitHub repo somewhere. I think it's this one. And if you go through this, it will have examples for all the API providers. There's a lot of stuff here, and it's pretty informative. I mean, none of this is any confusing. I was pretty stupid back when I did this in 2020. If I could do all of this again, I'd start things off by studying WebSockets, and then I start things off by studying this stuff here. But back in early 2020, web development was a black magic for me. So what I did was essentially grind all these examples and try rewriting it in my own way. And compared to 3.5 years ago, there are many more of them. So maybe I myself for a project I'm eyeing should go through all of them. But that's about it for now for this tutorial. If you are working on a language, I definitely suggest going through all of them. Moving on. Okay, so what we will do is replace the 0 and Q with the signal R. We will do that in the next video. I meant to do it in this one, but I see that it is already an hour long, so we'll split that into two. See you soon. Please like, please subscribe. Maybe some of you in the programming language community will find this useful, I hope. Until then, stay safe.